Centurion Ri265, MasterCraft X26. The two largest surf boats on the market. We're putting them head to head here on the water to see which one comes out on top. We're gonna take a look at the surf wave, the wakeboard wake, the water ski wake, and the way the boat drives and handles in the water. Let's go check it out. What's up guys, this is Mitch from Boardco. This is part 2 of our comparison between a MasterCraft X26 and a Centurion Ri265. If you missed part 1, you may want to go check that out where we talk about the features of each one of the boats, the pros and cons, and which one may fit you and your needs the best. We're now going to put these boats on the water and directly compare them and look at all aspects of the performance and driving of these different boats. Let's go jump in the MasterCraft X26 and the Ri265 and compare and see what they've got.
All right guys, we are actually now here back in my office because we had unfortunately some audio issues that were out on the water. We ended up having a mic lose signal and didn't find out until afterwards when we shot everything. So all the audio was transmitting, but it didn't actually save onto the file. So you're gonna get a voiceover from me talking about what we experienced when we were out on the MasterCraft and the Centurion. And then we actually had a little later on where the audio did kick back in and work. So we'll jump back over to me talking at the lake. So, but this is actually a great opportunity because there's a few things we've dug into and learned a bit since we went out, so I can cover those and hit on them. All right, so we're gonna dive in and take a look at the performance aspects of these boats. We're gonna start with the driving and handling, then talk about the water ski wake, the wakeboard wake, and the surf wave. Now, before I jump into it, there's something I really wanted to point out that I highlighted in the previous video, but I just wanna reiterate it in case any of you are wondering. The two boats we're comparing are comparable models. They're both 26 footers. The Ri265 is a brand new 2025 model boat. The X26 is a 2024 model boat, so it's not technically current model year. The reason why we're not running a 2025 is just because getting access to these boats is really hard. I can't exactly call up a MasterCraft dealership and say, hey, we want to do a comparison video between these boats. It doesn't really work that way, and it's really hard to get access to them. With that being said, the performance of the boat should be exactly the same between a 2024 and a 2025. If any of you know of any differences in performance, please let me know. But the only difference really between them is the dash screens and the software that is used between the two boats. So everything in this video should be a direct comparison, whether you're comparing a 2024 or a 2025 X26. So with that being said, let's dive into the way the two boats drive and handle. All right, first up was the driving and handling between these two boats. We tested it at high speed, going and turning and maneuvering the boats. We also tested driving the boats through rough water conditions, turning back around, going through wakeboard wakes, and just seeing how it was going to handle big waves and rough water. Now, it was really similar to what I was expecting on the boats. One thing MasterCraft does a great job at is the driving and handling of the boats, particularly in smooth water or at high speeds. What that means is that when you're going through sharp turns and aggressively driving the boat, let's say, you know, whipping around and trying to drive it more like a sports car, the MasterCraft does a fantastic job because it tends to slide across the water because of the flat hull design, where the Centurion, on the other hand, really banks and runs almost like it's on rails, meaning that it's going to grab and turn and maneuver really effectively, but it's not going to slide around. So if you're wanting to do power turns and rip around, the MasterCraft, in my opinion, is actually a more fun boat to drive in that aspect. But with that being said, the way that most of us are going to use the boats out on the water, i.e. driving through rougher water conditions, wanting to be able to turn and maneuver effectively and track where you're going, that is going to hand over to the Centurion. So really between the two, there's pluses and minuses. The MasterCraft is more fun to drive, just ripping around on smooth water, taking power turns. The Centurion is going to have better functional use out on the water. With that being said, let's talk about rough water ride. Once again, coming back, the flat bottom hull on the MasterCraft versus the V hull on the Centurion. The Centurion tracked through rough water, was a bit more stable, didn't beat you up nearly as much as a flat bottom hull. With that being said, the MasterCraft actually was pretty good and was better than a lot of other boats that I have been on that are 25 and 26 footers. In my opinion, it drives better in rough water than Malibus do. It's fairly comparable to Nautiques, primarily just because of the build quality and the weight on the boats, but it's also going to do a better job than other flat bottom boats like a Supra or a Taiga or things of that nature. But overall, fantastic driving boats, both of them. They both do a great job. It just really depends on what your preferences are as to driving one versus driving the other, and if you're going to be in big open water and rough water conditions, or if you're going to be on mostly smooth, glassy lakes most of the time when you're out on the water. Next up, we took a look at water ski performance between these two boats. Now, the difference between them was actually fairly minimal when we got it all dialed in. The MasterCraft Wake was potentially a little bit smaller. The Centurion Wake was maybe a little bit smoother transition for water skiing, but they're both really comparable. Neither one of these boats are water ski boats. They're not going to do a great job. However, if you're wanting to go and take a recreational water ski set, just going and cruising some turns, taking the spin on glassy water before the water gets rougher and you switch over to surfing, both of these are quite honestly going to do a pretty good job, and there wasn't a real major contending winner. If I really had to hand it to it, I'd probably say the MasterCraft, but they're very comparable as far as ski wakes, and neither one of them are great. But for recreational, and if you just want to go and take some big turns, they both can actually get the job done and are both going to be better than other boats that are out there in the market. I actually think that both of these did a better job than like a Malibu, just because the wake is a little bit more gradual transition, and both of them are better than a Nautique, because quite frankly, the Nautique water ski wake on like a G25 is about the worst water ski wake that is in existence. That's just because it's primarily designed as a wakeboard boat and surf boat, where both the MasterCraft and the Centurion actually flattened out decently well once you got going over 30 miles an hour. Next up, wakeboard wake. So between these two, both had actually an okay, decent wakeboard wake. They're big 26-foot boats, and they're not going to wakeboard nearly as well as a smaller boat like a 23 or a 24 footer. And they both wanted to run a little bit higher speed in order to clean up the wake. If you're going to be running at like 19 miles an hour, they both actually kind of struggle a bit. Once you bump up to like 21, 22, they do a decent job. Between the two, the MasterCraft was a little bit cleaner as long as you had it weighted properly straight down the middle. However, the MasterCraft was also more weight sensitive than the Centurion, which was actually really surprising to all of us in the boat. There's some more stuff that I'll show with that in just a minute. But between the two different boats, the MasterCraft had overall a cleaner, more symmetrical wakeboard wake. The Ri265, a little bit more washy on the top. When you have a rider that pulls into the side, that will typically clean up a bit. But between the two, which one's the better wakeboard boat? I'm going to hand this one to the MasterCraft X26. So I want to revisit what I was saying about weight sensitivity in the MasterCraft X26. And this is something that I'm actually kind of glad the audio broke down, because I can sit here and talk to you guys about it and give you a lot more detailed information about what I experienced when I was out on the boat. And I've got some video to show you what we were seeing. So when we were out on the boat, when we got the X26 going above 20 miles an hour, the boat became extremely weight sensitive from side to side, and it got more weight sensitive the faster we went. In fact, once you start going above 30 miles an hour, if you had one person that moved from one side of the boat to the other, it would have a tendency to pitch and roll and almost like throw you out the side of the boat. You can see what I'm talking about in this video here. And in fact, we actually have video from our cameraman that was shooting that you can see his reaction and see that we don't have like a bunch of people that are jumping from one side to the other. It really is one person moving from side to side. We did a bunch of digging to try and find if there was something going on with the boat, like the SurfStar system engaging when it wasn't supposed to. And we determined that there wasn't anything that we could see that was going on. This just didn't sit right with us. And so we did a bunch of research after we got off of the lake, and in talking to different people that we know that work with MasterCrafts a lot, their response was that if the boat has the center plate engaging at speed, it has a tendency to get really weight sensitive like this. So it did have an issue going on with the boat, because it was showing that our center plate was not engaging at all, that it was at 0, when in fact it was engaging to a higher rate. But that is something that you could maybe actually have a use case scenario around, such as if you're wanting to water ski behind the boat, you would engage the center plate to mellow the wake out. However, it can make the boat extremely weight sensitive. And when it wasn't washed out and the plate was completely out of the water, it still was really weight sensitive, though not nearly as bad as when the center plate was engaged. It will still be really weight sensitive for water skiing and wakeboarding. So if you have one person that just moves a couple feet, you will definitely notice it with the wake. And it's substantially more weight sensitive than like the Centurion, which was surprising to all of us, because the Centurion is a V bottom hull and you would assume it would be more tippy. However, the MasterCraft was substantially more weight sensitive. That said, it's not as bad of an issue as we were expecting, because it is primarily stemming from the plate engaging, and we weren't thinking that it was. We just thought it was that dramatic all of the time. which was pretty shocking and wild to what we experienced. Last up, we are going to talk about surf waves. So between the two boats, they both actually did a pretty decent job surfing. They both had long waves that extended out the back of the boat a decent amount. The Ri265 was about 5 to 8 feet longer than the X26 as far as surfable area, and it had significantly more power at the back of the wave, but they both threw a long surf wave. One other thing that was really nice about them is both waves were adjustable, meaning that you could use the side plates, whether we're talking the quick surf system on the Centurion or the Surfstar system on the MasterCraft, to contour and shape the waves to mellow them out or to steepen them up. With that being said, there was a few differences that we experienced. The Centurion wave had the ability to go substantially steeper than the MasterCraft, and the real big difference between the two waves was the Centurion wave just had dramatically more power to it. In fact, you can see in the split screen of these waves, you see one wave on the top, one wave on the bottom, and what we experienced is what oftentimes is referred to in ocean surfing as a wave being heavier or lighter. The Centurion wave is substantially heavier, meaning it's just got a lot more mass to it. It's a lot thicker through the main area that you're surfing, and therefore drives a lot more power. Where on the other hand, the MasterCraft wave is thinner at the top, and it doesn't have nearly as much push or power to it. This is something that you really notice when you slide and slam into the wave, that the MasterCraft wave had a tendency to be spongy and kind of break out, where the Centurion wave would really push back and is a lot more firm and heavy. So if you got an ocean surf background, this will make complete sense to you. If you don't, just know and understand that the Centurion wave has just way more power and way more push, and it's something that you push into, it will push right back instead of breaking, crumbling, like if you're spinning through it with a 360 or if you're slashing on the top of the wave. That said, overall, both were good surf boats. They both threw a great wave that we could have a really good time on, but the Centurion wave was substantially more powerful, and because of the additional power, allowed it to be customized to shapes that we couldn't really get with the MasterCraft. The MasterCraft was either taller and steeper and more powerful, or it was longer and more mellow. But where the Centurion, you could make a big mellow wave, you could make a big steep wave. It gave you full control over both the size and the shapes of the wave. With that being said, this is where the audio ended up cutting back in, and we had decent audio connection. We'll jump over, and we actually have Tyler, who is surfing it on both of these waves, give his feedback and opinion on exactly what he experienced between them.
All right, we just got done surfing behind the X26 and the Ri265. I've got Tyler here who is spending the time behind the boats. I wanted him to give you his feedback because there's certain things that translate through and you can see via video, such as the length of the surf wave, but there's other things that you can't really tell, such as the way the wave feels. And if you haven't spent a lot of time surfing on a bunch of different boats, the way the wave feels on the boats can be radically different from one wave to another, even if the two waves look similar. So Tyler, what was your experience on the X26 and how did it compare to the Ri265?
So the X26 is, to kind of put it simple, is mellow in every way. It doesn't have a ton of push. It doesn't have a super firm lip, so it's a little bit harder to get airs and harder to generate speed. So you can't do the big bottom turns. You can't carve off the top of the lip as hard as you can on a Centurion, just due to the Centurion moving so much more water and having much more mass. I will say the X26 got a little bit longer than I think we all were expecting. Had a good amount of push towards the back end of it due to that speed. When you do speed up, you do get a little bit more firmness to the lip as well. So in that long wave, it actually wasn't too bad. It did get a little bit further than other manufacturers as far as long as a 265. It's definitely not quite that long, but it did do a pretty good job. But I think the main takeaway from the X26 is it's just mellow. It's not going to overperform by any means. It'll be good for kind of just your more intermediate to beginner people. They're not going to feel like they're coming down the face too fast or generating too much speed. I ride a little bit of a smaller surfboard. I ride a 50-inch board, and it was a little tough for me to keep up. I was constantly on my front foot, definitely more than this wave for sure. And just the sheer amount of push on the 265 was kind of hard to put it in words, honestly. I mean, we were back there and it was no problem at all, where I'm a little bit more on my front foot on the X26 than this boat.
Absolutely. So what Tyler's referring to there is, in ocean surfing world, is referred to as a heavy wave versus a light wave. And it's not necessarily talking about how tall it is or how long it is. It's actually how thick the wave is and how much mass it has. And that was something that you can tell visually looking at, but you just got to understand what to look at to understand the difference of just how much more water volume is sitting there back behind the boat. So when you're describe for people, when you're talking about a wave being not as firm on like a MasterCraft or really any other boat, how does that compare to having a wave that is a lot more firm? Like, what does that do when you're riding?
It does two different things. I kind of touched on it with the airs. It does make tricks a little bit easier, just because you can push off of the wave. When you try and air on the X26, it kind of mushes and pushes out of the way. Where on this boat, when you push off, it actually pushes the board away from you. So it's easier for airs. It also will kind of like catch you after like a 360, or if you land heavy on an air and it pushes you back. You want a firm lip because it does mean it has more push towards the back end and will kind of suck you back up in the surf a little bit easier. On this boat, when you get past the sweet spot, you have about 2 feet before you kind of fall out the back of it. On the MasterCraft, when you do fall out of the pocket, you're pretty much out of it. It's hard to kind of get back into the wave, and that attributes back to that firm lip, because if you can get in front of the push and in front of the barrel, then it'll scoop you back up, where in that boat, it's just not quite there, so it's hard to kind of stay in front of it.
That makes sense. So that's one thing that I know a lot of guys experience, especially if you got bigger riders, bigger guys, having a firmer lip, it makes it so that the wave doesn't give when you push into it, as opposed to a wave that is a lot softer, you just basically break right through it. And that's especially the case if you're slashing, carving, and doing airs or doing 360s, especially as a bigger guy. I know that's a big challenge a lot of people have when they're bigger riders. They're going to learn 360s, try and get them down to where they're consistent, and they'll go and they just blast through the top of the wave and end up falling out the back. And where if you have a wave that's going to maintain its shape, they can spin up on the top of the lip and not just fade out the back of the wave when they do it. So, but overall, so your experience with how does like the X26 that you surf behind, how does it compare to other different boats you surf behind, boats like Malibus, Nautiques, other things of that nature?
It's not as powerful as a Nautique. I think that's the main takeaway, is Nautique is always super steep, super powerful, a lot of firmness on that lip, where with the Centurion series you can get each individual wave. So if you want more of that mellow, obviously you can get that, but you can get the same Nautique wave as well. So it's definitely not quite up there. It's pretty close to a 25 or 23 LSV as far as your push goes. Both of those boats do have very soft lips that we've kind of been talking about. So it's pretty close to a Malibu. I will say it gets a little bit longer than your Malibu, and I would say probably a little bit longer than a Nautique as well. It got a little bit longer. I was surprised on the length of that surf wave, but I would say we're probably 4 or 5 feet longer on this one. And again, that's like comfortably surfing. I'm sure we could push that boat a little bit further back. I'm sure we could push this boat further back as well, but you don't want to be pumping the entire time you're trying to stay in the surf waves. So it compares kind of middle ground to everything as far as your surf wave goes.
Yeah, so a decent overall surf boat, not a phenomenal surf boat. I think your takeaway from that is it's more on the mellow side of the end of the spectrum. A Nautique is more on the steep end of the spectrum, and it's hard to make it mellow.
Yeah.
MasterCraft is mellow, it's hard to make it steep. The one takeaway is the Centurion can be either steep or mellow, just depending on how you want.
I was pretty surprised that was, because that one goes up to a 7 for like.
Yeah, well, we had it on the steepest setting when you're riding.
Yeah, and that was, again, pretty mellow. Like if you put this in the steepest setting or a Nautique on the steepest setting, you feel like you're getting washed away, you know? So it is just kind of mellow overall, like you stated.
Sweet, absolutely. Well, hopefully that gives you an idea of what you can expect actually surfing. Like I mentioned, there's some stuff you can tell in the video, there's some stuff you can't. The number one recommendation I have by far is, if you're really wanting to get a boat with the best surf wave overall, is get out behind it, because it's something that you really have to experience to believe. And I know for me personally, when I go and jump from one boat to the next, either the same day or within a couple of days of each other, it's very obvious how much better one boat will surf than another, and how not close the two boats are. So definitely recommend getting behind, whether it's an X26 and an Ri265, just get behind any of the boats that you're wanting to look and surf at, because it's really something that's noticeable. And don't just go, hey, is the wave good? But compare it to other stuff, and it will be really obvious as to which one is superior.
Absolutely. I think the biggest takeaway too is a perfect surf wave for me is not a perfect surf wave for Mitch, and it's not a perfect surf wave for you. So you do need to get out there and and just get behind every single boat. And that is the one nice thing with the Centurion as well, is that you can have each individual wave be so different from the other wave that a different family member, a different friend likes. And so you can get pretty much every surf wave behind this boat, which is very nice.
Absolutely. So awesome.
All right, now we've had a chance to look at all of the different aspects. Let's take a look at how these boats compare directly head to head. We took a look at the driving and handling, and what we saw is, in my opinion, smooth water handling is going to go over to the MasterCraft and the wind column, where rough water handling is going to go over to the Centurion. From a drivability and usability standpoint, this one is going to also go to the Centurion, primarily just because of the weight sensitivity in the boats, which was really apparent while you're driving around and cruising, but also is going to apply to the water ski wake and the wakeboard wake. Now, speaking of water ski wake and wakeboard wake, the water ski wake between the two boats, this one really came out as kind of a tie. If there was an advantage, it would go the MasterCraft, but they're so similar, I can't really tell you one wake is going to be way better than the other. Now, when it comes to wakeboard wakes, this one, other than the weight sensitivity issue, which is something that's definitely noticeable, I would put this one in the wind column for the MasterCraft X26. The wake is just a little bit cleaner and more consistent, which is something that you would expect in a 26.5, which is what you'd expect with a 26.5 foot boat that has got a more flat bottom hull, that it'll be a better boat for wakeboarding. Let's face it, the X26 was designed as a wakeboard boat that they put some attachments on to make it surf, where the Centurion was designed as a surf focused boat that they made it so you can also wakeboard. So wakeboard goes to the X26. Now, when it comes down to the surf waves, the results really aren't that surprising when you look at the fact that the Centurion has a surf focused hull design instead of one that was modified from a wakeboard hull, and also just the sheer amount of ballast that are packed into these boats. So the Centurion has 5,850 pounds of ballast versus the X26, which is sitting just about 4,000, meaning that in order to get the same surf performance out of the X26, you'd have to add an additional 1,700 pounds to get the equivalent amount of displacement. This means that you're going to have to add, I don't know, another 8-9 people to the boat just to make it so it will measure up to the Ri265 as far as displacement goes. Even then, it still doesn't have the surf-focused hull design. So wake surfing is going to be squarely in the Ri265 column. Now, when we're talking about price tag, there's two different things I wanted to highlight. The first one is the actual price of the boats, and the other one is the cost of ownership. In other words, what you can expect from when it comes to depreciation and value on each one of these. Now, when we did a bunch of digging and looked around, we found the difference in price between these boats. And when I say price, I'm talking about the price you actually pay, not MSRP, which is just some inflated, made-up number that nobody actually pays for boats. When you look at the price there is actually paid for each one of these models, the Ri265 comes in at roughly $80,000 less on average than a comparably equipped X26. Now, this changes based on what motors in the boat, what options, all of those different things. But if you compare them apples to apples, you're going to save about $80,000 on the Centurion. Now, what does that mean when it comes to resale value? Well, when you do some digging and looking around, what you find is that the X26 actually depreciates over the first 3 years at a rate that is about 50% higher than an Ri265. And the same type of thing happens when you start looking at X24s versus Ri245s, things like FE23s versus XT23s for MasterCraft. And what it really boils down to is the price tag that is asked for MasterCrafts on the front end is typically a bit higher, but after a couple of years, they end up actually equaling out. So like a 2022 Ri265 comes in about the same price tag as a 2022 X26 for MasterCraft. So this obviously can vary depending on your location, where you're at, but if you go average nationwide, this is about what you can expect between these two different boat models. And like I said, it translates across the board. So the question is this what you were expecting? Do you think the MasterCraft is worth $80,000 more? Do you think that it's a better boat and should hold its value better? Do you think the Ri265 is the superior boat? If you watched the first video and you watched this one, give us your thoughts and let us know exactly what you think. Which boat would you take if you're looking between them, and which boat would you rather pay for if you're spending your money between these two boats? So hopefully this is helpful. If you want to see more content like this, check out our other videos on YouTube, as well as check out our other social platforms, and come hang out with us at boardco.com. We'd love to help you if you have any questions, or just work with you on anything that you need, whether we're talking surfboards, wakeboards, or giving you expertise on anything else that we can possibly help with. Once again, this is Mitch from Boardco. Thanks for spending some time with us. We'll see you later.